This podcast episode is sponsored by Whoop, the wearable technology that I wear every single day. We will put the discount code in the show notes, and one other, Thorn Health Tech, which are the products that I take to take my performance to the very next level. They're NSF certified for sport, highest quality, potency, and purity on the supplement market today, also in the show notes. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Lassini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform gives me the chance to sit down with people who not only have amazing minds, but amazing stories. And today, I got to sit down with Matt Eversmann. Most of the world will know him through being the main real-life figure that Black Hawk Down, the movie, represented. Today, I got to see the man behind it all, and we had a great conversation about high standards, identity, and overcoming failures. It was an absolute privilege and pleasure to get to know Matt on a deeper level here, and I hope that if you're anyone that's out there looking to help someone go through a transition, or you yourself are going through transition, this is going to be an amazing episode for you, Matt Eversmann. Thank you so much for carving out the time to be here.
Thank you for having me. It's a great way to start off Holy Week.
It's amazing. And I was thinking about this idea in leadership: leaders disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. That's my favorite definition for it. They have this ability to be relentlessly hardworking and at the same time generous. I met you, I guess, a few months ago now, and you have that ability to be very kind and humble, and at the same time believe in holding a high standard. Can you talk about where that comes from?
Well, first of all, thank you for that again. I said, Heckle and Jekyll stuff when we like, no, Mark, you're far kinder than I am. But it is true, and there's so much to unpack about what you just said. But the short answer is, I think I came to this conclusion long ago that, standards dictate outcomes, before the chaos does. And it took a little while to refine this idea, and I promise this will come back to answering your question.
Sure.
But this idea that, man, we get through tough times by having high standards, and tough times in our lives by having high standards, whether it's work, whether it's our personal lives, whether it's our spiritual lives, whatever it is, it's all this pursuit of having high standards. And I think, to that point, to land the plane here, one of those things that we don't do very well out here is act kindly. And I think that it almost sounds saccharine to say, he's a kind man. He's a very nice man. He's a thoughtful man. But I realize, like, we need to go out of our way to be kind. And I guess I'm sounding a little bit self-righteous, but I just believe, man, everybody's got so much in their lives. There's so many challenges that all of us have just making it through a day. So that's a long-winded answer to the question, but I think that's I'm flattered that you noticed, and you are kind truly to bring it out.
Thank you. What you strike in my mind is Carol Dweck, who wrote this book called Mindset. She has this really cool, cheeky exercise that she puts students through, and it's called GSA, gift, skill, and attitudinal. And the whole idea is, do you believe that that person's enthusiasm or kindness is a gift, like they were just given through genetic endowment? Was it a skill that they learned through someone else, or is it attitudinal and a choice? And through the entire conversation, they're taking tallies of gift and skill, but it's always an attitude. So of course you probably learned it from somewhere, or you had a predisposition to be a little bit more kind. One of the things that fascinates about your story is, you've seen a lot of military action, you've seen highs and lows and stuff like that, but you still have this attitudinal choice of kindness. Why?
I think that it's, as you sort of alluded to, Mark, there's this, all these influences throughout our life. Whether for me, it was in my military career, whether it's, our childhoods or whatever it is, all these things do make us the people we are literally today. And I think for me, I spend a lot of time, like we were talking about earlier, around a lot of people who are really, really good at their jobs in the military, and yet their personalities were not quite as friendly and forgiving because of the job. So basically, Army Rangers and soldiers and guys and gals that do tough things for a living, I think took on this personality that somehow meant you really couldn't be friendly, and you had to be rough and tough and gruff and very standoffish and all these things. And I realized, like, you know, I think I'd rather go to war with somebody that's a little more engaging. I think I'd rather like to go. I want to go with a professional, but I really like to go to war with somebody that I actually liked, and that sort of, if I were going to nail it down, I think that's where I realized, like, man, you can be a really good operator, you can be a really good soldier, you can be a really good sergeant, and fill in the blank, whatever the qualifier is, but you can also be a good man, and good by any definition of, regardless of rank, you can just be a good man. Doesn't mean a pushover, because everybody immediately assumes, like, man, if you're being a nice guy, then you're a Sally, and we can run all over you. Like, that absolutely couldn't be further from the truth.
Sure.
But anyway, a long-winded answer to your question. I think that this idea, like, who do you want to go down a dark alley with? The guy that you have to follow, or the guy you want to follow?
Right. There's this exercise that I do. It's fun. You ask students, raise your hand. I know it's a silly question, but if you're in school, and they're like, yeah, I'm in school. Raise your hand and keep it raised if you're into school. And then a lot of hands come down because the engagement word that you talked about there, like, to be engaged in something is totally different than being in the school or in a team, but to be into is a totally different beast. I want to click back to the early part of, if you want to go to your childhood, you can, but when you and I grabbed coffee, I was really moved on how you got into the Army. Right. And the things that happened a few chapters before it, because everybody can see Matt Eversmann, Black Hawk Down, amazing. Wow. Right. But I think they can really learn from your earlier arc and what even brought you to this call to be a leader.
Yeah. Well, again, it's funny. In, people that are listening or watching, thank you. If you're going to use the idea of success, measuring people by their success, yours truly, the fair statement would be you should look at the failures, because failures are what lead us to success, which I'd like to come back to in a minute about failure specifically. But I had a lot of whiffs, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of fumbles, all along the way, and some were quite spectacular. Just to not give you the litany of things that I have not even won a bronze medal in. I got to college, and wonderful school in Virginia, Hampton-Sydney College, the last private all-male, non-military liberal arts college in America. Amazing place. And promptly started, losing my battle treading water. I, eked it out as an econ and French major for 3 years before they mercifully put me out of my misery and told me to take a little break from school. So that was kind of failure, the big failure number one. Like, all of a sudden you're 20 years old, and your life has just ended, because at the time, like, man, what are you going to do? Go haul bricks around or do something? That's no beckoning compliment to the trades, but we put so much pressure on people. You got to get that degree. You got to get a degree, or you ain't going nowhere. You're going to be under the bridge. That took me to this point of, boy, what do I do now? You heard the story. The long story. I worked for my mom and dad in this lumber yard in this small town, and ran into a buddy who had met a similar fate, but he joined the Army. And I thought, wow, that sounded like a pretty neat thing to do for a young man. This is in 1987, so Cold War's going on, and the idea of boxing up the Russians in Europe was really a great selling point for, a young guy that needed to get his head screwed on. And as the story goes, I needed to accomplish something like that. Really, as I thought about it, like, I got to do something all on my own, and the military was it. So basic training and all these things. And this, not, to spare everybody the entire biography, joined the military, enjoyed the military, liked what I was doing, had a little bit of aptitude. And, kind of at each gate, there was a failure. I'd fail a PT test and, I'd get recycled in ranger school. I would come out and I would get a job and then have another failure and have to take another job. And, all these things happen and happen. And they would always, though, over time, you realize like they're really not failures. They're just sort of detours. And again, not to be so Dr. Philish about, hey, yeah, it hurts and your ego gets bruised and all these things. And sometimes it was my fault and sometimes it was just, variables out of my control. So the whole point of this long-winded answer to your really good question was I started realizing over time not to expect failure, but to understand like, hey man, do your best, swing for the fences, give it your best shot, be as prepared as you can be. And if it doesn't happen, then God didn't want it to. It wasn't supposed to be. And that all of a sudden takes the blinders off and you realize, I wonder where it's going to take me next. And you look at it more as an exciting possibility than, oh my gosh, my life's over. And listen, I've had I tell people just to fast forward, I had 3 jobs post-military life in 10 years. 3 jobs that I probably shouldn't have said yes to any of them. They all ended, not all badly, but they all ended not of my choosing. And one would say like, golly, you've had a horrible, as adult with a wife and daughter and house payments and all this stuff. I'm like, it just wasn't supposed to be that way. And you figure, God's going to open up something else for me. And he did. And, here we are in South Florida today. And it's a whole different kettle of fish than I ever would have thought in 1987, failing out of school.
I mean, your optimism is remarkable. I love how you talked about the detours, and thank you for taking listeners into the failure after failure after failure, because it's very easy to listen to a podcast and be listening to someone that you hold in such esteem and be like, oh, I can never be like that guy because, they must have always had success along the way. And I will click back into the failures that you had, but I like the idea, even if it's trite, fail means first attempt in learning. And people who have listened to me as of late know that I came across Jack Nicklaus, asked him what made him a perennial winner in golf. And one of his statements to me was, I learned why I was losing and I did less of that.
Yeah.
And I just love that idea where it's kind of like, even though it's kind of trite, the idea that how the light bulb was invented is 9,999 ways of not doing it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people need to go through those failures with volume to say, okay, now I'm getting to a place of finding a little bit more success. So coming into you finding success and starting to get into the Army, right? So yes, you are failing PT and different things like that, but then you go through a miraculous journey to now get called into a leadership position. Can you start talking about those successes once you get into the military?
Yeah. So I would tell you, and just as a little precursor to universally, I think also this, and this is a recent, last few years for me, Mark, aptitude has, let's face it, aptitude has something to play in all of our lives, in every pursuit, whatever it is we're doing. I can't throw left-handed, I can't skate backwards. I can't,
Sure.
There's some things I just don't have the aptitude for. And
Right.
I plant that seed. As I look back on college, for instance, and I promise we'll get to the Army stuff in a sec, but I realized like macroeconomic theory to this day, come on, man. I mean, really, like I applaud anybody that understands it, not me. And I realized like, what was I thinking? Like, what was I thinking? But you sometimes you keep pushing, you're not listening, and you realize like, hey man, God's going to tell you sooner or later, this dog ain't hunting for you, So getting into the Army, what I did realize was that, wow, this is stuff that I understand. But not only the big mission of the Army, but down at the soldier level, like I get it. This is what I got to do. The Army explains everything to you. There's a rule and a regulation for everything. I'm like, I can follow these rules. And we're doing tough things with, generally speaking, tough men. At the time, it's all male. And I realized, like, I really like that. So it was kind of a perfect storm. Like, I stumbled into this really great environment that kind of no matter which way I looked, I'm like, I like everything about it. Not to mention, I'm meeting people that I would never have met before,
Mm,
melting pot kind of stuff. But I realize, man, you find this, whatever cliche or analogy we want to use, but you find kind of your tribe, you
sure.
find this base, and you realize, like, man, it doesn't matter how much they're paying you. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna do well, and it's like the perfect storm that I've been looking for all my life, and that's why that idea, like all of a sudden, like, hey, man, now you're in that you get promoted to this next level, and you've got leadership responsibilities as a young man, and the army is training you and developing you in um, the idea and the ideals of leadership, and you get to kind of walk through, talk through, and demonstrate it every single moment of every day to learn to be a better leader. I mean, it's really quite a brilliant system,
Mm,
in one sense. But I again, I like to think, without being too, um, again, self-righteous. I think I was learning that I enjoyed being with the men. I enjoyed being put in charge, and I don't mean that patting myself on the back, but when they're like, "Hey, step up and you lead PT," I'm like, "Okay, let me show you." Let me show you, Sergeant, that I can do this and do it well. And oh, by the way, hopefully, not waste everybody's time and make a monkey out of myself. Anyway, there's an answer in there somewhere, I suspect, hopefully, about to whom much is given, much is expected. And that pressure of being able to perform, even on mundane tasks as that leader, I like that. I thought that was kind of neat. Like, all eyes are on me, not like all eyes are on me, but all eyes, Matt, you better have your ducks in a row or you're going to get fired.
yeah.
And anyway, that was my 2 cents.
I mean, the Luke 12:48 quote that you just said, where to whom much is given, much is expected, is definitely a top 10 biblical verse in my life in terms of one that's really helped me live a life that's more right as rain. In terms of, there's a line you said, I was learning leadership all along the way. That would infer that leadership is a skill that can be learned, right? And I have talked to different people who are under the impression that leadership or being called to be a leader is something that some people have versus don't have. So I just wanted to pull on the thread that you gave us and said I was learning leadership all along the way. What did you mean by that statement?
Yeah, goes back to a question that I was asked years ago. I went up to West Point to speak. It was post Mogadishu, and one of the cadets asked me, he's like, can you learn leadership from a book? And I'm like, wow, that's a gotcha question. Going to put a whole industry out of business if I say no. But the short answer is, you can learn theory. Of course you can. And I mean, look at all the books, and they're all good. Like, literally, they are all good. You've got amazing ones all around here. Um, they won't resonate with all of us, and for a variety of reasons. But we can read them and get an idea.
Hmm.
But you can't just think, for instance, about I'm going to be a good lacrosse player because I watched the world championships. Like, you've got to put it into practice. You have to practice, to be perfect. The military gives you that opportunity because even in peacetime, even in garrison, there is still a leader in charge of every bit of your activities throughout your entire day and even in through your night, because leaders are always responsible for their subordinates. So you're constantly being challenged as I'm talking about you, the leader, on wherever you are on the masthead. You are constantly being held accountable. And I don't know of any other organization or institution generally outside of the paramilitary world where your leadership skills are challenged or tested 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that, you can look at it, man, it's a horrible thing, or you can look at it like that's actually a really good thing because you're constantly keeps you, on your toes. It constantly keeps you, the young sergeant or the young lieutenant, thinking about not only my job and my mission, but thinking about the men and the women and what am I doing to take care of them? What am I doing to prepare them? Most importantly, to go to war because we could go to the show, tomorrow. And that's sort of the ultimate exam, was for really kind of cut through all the chafe, or the chaff, you got to prepare your men to go to war, and they might die, with you.
Yeah. The separation is in the preparation. In the developmental psychology world, they talk about something is first imagined and then it's acted out and then it's talked and communicated. So when we're talking about the books on leadership, even take my older sister, for example. When we were very young, she looked at my mom and played out meta mom by telling me what to do or to sit down or be her student or something like that, or sit down and she's going to feed me this plate. She couldn't communicate that she's acting like mom yet. However, she was playing the role of it.
Yeah.
She's imagining meta mom and then acting that out. And that doesn't stop. Just because if you stopped a group of 7-year-olds that are playing soccer and say, what are the rules? They would say different rules, right? Because they don't really know the rules, but they're trying to get something down here, just like people are trying to get leadership down, right? So you can imagine what a good leader's like, prepare and then fail at being a good or bad leader, whatever that might mean, and then you communicate it through a book or something like this.
Yeah.
Before you and I hopped on this podcast, we were having coffee and you and I were talking about, or maybe you were just listening to me rant, about leadership versus management. And I think one of the ways you can learn what it is what it's not. So could I ask you, because you brought up a really cool idea earlier on about you saw personalities that you wouldn't want to engage with. So could you go deeper on what maybe leadership is not and some of the things that people have a misinterpretation or a misconception of, oh, they think they're being a great leader, but that's not leadership.
Yeah, wow. Well, listen, we could spend the whole rest of the year, I think, talking about like this is the book that has yet to be written, because it's means a little bit of everything to everyone. I think, to answer your question from the gut, where we were talking about, what I think leadership in the military, what I learned as a young 21-year-old up until a 42-year-old when I retired about leadership, my only job as an adult was in the military and mission focused, as you might imagine. So it's all this, how do I get the best out of my man? At the time, again, I was in the infantry, it was all male. How do I get the best out of my man so that we are ready on a moment's notice to go do really dangerous, hard things that could literally be life and death in order to execute this mission, whatever that is. That to me was leadership, in military definition, the ability to influence others to, accomplish a task in the absence of orders, like that, create this, they've modified it over the years, but that was it. Like, how do you get people to do the right thing when nobody's watching? Which I think universally works. I get out here and, you meet business professionals and they're like, hey, Matt, I'd love you to come talk to, my team about leadership. Everybody wants leaders. I'm like, okay. And what I found was they really don't want to train this group per se to go do challenging things. They want people to take responsibility and make them more money, which is not at all. It's not like that's a horrible thing by any means, but they're really not concerned about is Matt Eversmann, the junior analyst, gonna get the wherewithal to go better himself so that he can be a senior analyst or whatever, get promoted faster. I want to take you under my wing and I want you to be this, that, and the other. And I also want to take care of your personal life and make sure that you're living on the straight and narrow. All these things that leaders do in the military, it's expected. Out here, it's not. So that kind of thing was like, yeah, I think as we came to the conclusion out here, they generally want a little bit of leadership decision making, but mostly we want you to run a system better. We want to run a process, really more managed. You're not training 5 guys at Goldman to go do something. You need to be able to make decisions that are going to make us some more dough. And again, I do distill this down to Eversmann level, which isn't quite fair, but that starts to separate. Like, yeah, leadership means a little something to everybody. My 2 cents, a little something different to everybody, which then kind of leads me to, Mark, this idea that, maybe it's not the focus necessarily on leadership that we ought to be talking about, but maybe we ought to be talking about followership. Maybe followership might be, something better, which is a 4-letter word. in most circles, like you're a good follower. It's like, well, yeah, because, in a hierarchy, we're all following somebody, like we are all following somebody down the road. So maybe if we talked in the sense of how do I make sure my boss is successful, the guy above me or the gal above me, how do I make sure the people, again, on the totem pole below me are successful? That's being a good, leader to them, but a good follower above. And that idea, I'm like, that really might be what you want out here. We want really good followers, and that's shouldn't be any shame in that, because they're always going to have people following you. Pardon me. But maybe that ought to be universally more accepted, like how to be a good follower, which would mean, hey, do you know your job? How good are you? Are you really good at your job? Like, do you know what's expected of you? If you do, good for you. But most people probably really don't. Kind of, but really don't. Could you do your boss's job? Anyway, I'm wandering, but that idea I think is maybe a better answer than this idea about leaders, because you and I, whether it's captain of the team, the whatever rank you are in the military with responsibility, like that in the common sense world is leadership by position, and doing the right thing and influence people to do the right thing, and ultimately to accomplish these missions. I'm rambling, sorry, but get me back on track.
Well, from a performance psychology perspective, I don't know if I coined it. I love this line: emulate until you can innovate. Emulate, copy. I remember when I walked into a pro lacrosse locker room, I was looking at the Matt Evanses and the Matt Danowskis and the Matt Abbotts and all three Matts.
I was gonna
And
say,
now I'm
man.
looking at Matt Eversmann. So here we go. Might be something there. In terms of, I tell this story. I put my bag right by the door, and I wanted to earn my way to the back of the locker room. I just felt like that was the right thing to do. I don't deserve to go back there yet, but if I emulate enough and innovate appropriately, followership. So going back on that idea, you said a quick definition in the military that they give about leadership: influence in the absence of orders. I think there's something there. I underlined it. Managerially, if you're a manager, you bark a lot of orders. You bark a lot of orders, and that's how you keep people in tasks. It's more pain oriented than pull pleasure oriented, and encouraging them to come in a certain direction. At least that's how it landed to me. Ariana Huffington, who's started the Huffington Post, and also she's on her fourth endeavor using AI for health reasons. It's pretty amazing to follow her journey. She still thinks she has decades ahead of her. She's, I think, in her 70s or 80s. She did this idea of an entry interview. So you hear a lot about an exit interview, but once someone's hired in her company, in the first day or so, what do you care about outside of work, so that we can make sure we're understanding that if that pops up, whether it's your kids or your dog or, and we can help support you in that so that you're great at this role.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally different, right? Caring holistically about the person and being able to encourage their development, because that's something that I circled, is the development side of things. If you're a manager, you want the task to get done. If you're a leader, you want to influence them in such a way to encourage their development. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah. No, and that is brilliant. And it's funny because old Matt would have probably laughed at that. Like, what do they know out here? In fact, I remember somebody saying, to me back in my young sergeant days, like, you got it easy, in the Army. Leadership in the easy is Army. It's, and I'm like, how dare you? You just self-righteous indignation of, you don't know what it's like. And,
Sure.
What he realized though is that it's not entirely false either. When you have a organization that is governed by the Constitution and the laws of the land, and basically anybody has to do, as long as it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral, you got to do what your boss tells you. In a broad sense, like, okay, there is some merit out here where you don't have quite that support. But back to this comment, that was when you were talking about, Ariana Huffington and your experience, in the professional lacrosse world, something that just popped to mind was, I remember when I showed up in Kuwait on our way to Iraq, and flying in the middle of the night. It's like, it is midnight. You get off the plane. It's in August of 2006, and it's like 112 degrees, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's hot. Anyway, you get off the plane, you get on they put you on these buses, and the buses take you to the cantonment area. And anyway, as you're driving through the airfield, they've got this serpentine, wall so the bombers can't, drive their trucks in. And I promise to get to the point here. So I'm sitting there, and they got the curtains over the windows, and I peek out the window, and as I'm going through the serpentine, somebody came up with this idea, like, let's stencil some motivational comments for the troops as you're coming in. And so they're, some of it's safety oriented, like, make sure you got your equipment or blah, blah, blah. And anyway, the one that stands out, there was a black stencil on this Jersey barrier, and it said, "We need leadership, not likership." Yeah. So I'm like, okay, that's about the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my entire career. And I harken back on it often, like, well intended, and somebody somewhere, when the general said, put this stuff on there, they did. But that really, I found that's actually been a very prevalent attitude if we're talking about, leadership in general. And this, we need you to make tough decisions, and it doesn't really, it's in tone that you don't have to be nice about it, because if you're nice, you're wrong. So you tell that to a bunch of 20-year-old corporals and 22-year-old, all of a sudden they're just like, yeah, man, I they got to do what I say. And so almost the meaner I am, the better, because you make a mistake, I'm going to clip your wings, and you're going to fear me. You're gonna absolutely fear me. And these could be really mild-mannered people. It's really kind of weird to watch, but that whole idea of there can be no room for friendliness in this idea of leadership, in the leadership profession. And I'm like, again, I don't buy that. I absolutely do not buy it. And I just, when you were talking about that, I do it out of fear of the consequences, and this whole mentality of just doing the right thing out of fear. I'm like, no, man, we've got to influence you. We've got to enforce standards. We got to educate you on standards. We've got to train you. We got to do everything we possibly can to keep you at the highest level we can possibly get. And then we got to raise the standards more. So we got to constantly try and get you to behave north of that band of excellence. And it seems to me that if that focus, as the card carrying leader, if you can do that, I would challenge that you can generally, if you can get this much out of people by yelling at them, just think how much you can get out of by smiling at them.
Right.
And again, I'm not saying that this is easy and it's all unicorn kind of stuff, but it is that idea of creating an environment where people really want to cut through all the BS and they just want to focus on being better.
Yeah.
And leaders control that. Leaders can help set that atmosphere. They can make other people, influence other people to help create that atmosphere. And, you've seen in those locker rooms that work. That wasn't just because of the coach or the owner. I would contend, that everybody's got a hand in that atmosphere, and literally how our locker room is, not to put this back on your lap, but you don't get that you can't just yell people into creating a nice atmosphere.
I think it was Sun Tzu who said, when things end up being successful, the team looks around and says, we did it ourselves. And that's the essence of great leadership. It wasn't a coach putting people somewhere because of fear and pain and things like this. But even though you might not have liked it, it is memorable. We need leadership, not likership. I think that's great. And I love how you said we got to be north of a band of excellence. I want to go into it for one or two questions because I think it's very fascinating. I want to hear your firsthand perspective on Somalia and going into that story, because we're talking about leadership, and then really early on in the podcast, you talked about how standards influence tough times, and you will fall to those in tough times. So how were you able to create an atmosphere, an environment that's beyond likership, so that when things got tough in Somalia, people were responding in the right way?
Well, I think there's a couple of answers, and this can no way be the Matt Eversmann show if we're talking about success in Somalia. But if you break it down in big chunks, people join the army, get into the big army where the standards are higher than civilian life, obviously. People respond to that and they decide, hey, man, I want to do something. Some people want to do something a little harder. So they have a different path to this next level called, the special operations world. Standards are considerably higher than the regular army. So right of that, you got a group of very willing people. You know what I mean? Like, there's all volunteer. So, kind of, if you're looking at the pyramid, you get to the ranger level, the delta level, the SEAL level. These are like 5-time volunteers, something like that. So the point is, like, you got a pretty good lump of clay to work with right off the bat, because they want to be there, and the standards are very high already. And so trying to explain to that soldier, about high standards, it's not as hard as maybe it might be somewhere else.
Sure.
So I was just trying to paint this picture. It wasn't just because Matt's so gifted. It's not. A lot of it is institutional, and it's set up for the training and all the, we're going to learn good marksmanship and all the skills that we need. But to fast forward, what I saw, kind of a combination of everything I told you earlier, was that I learned early on, I think soldiers respond to a genuine person. I think they're more willing to follow someone who treats them not just as a man, certainly that's sort of expected, but treats them with respect, and as you would anybody you met, just walking down the street, or sitting next to you on an airplane. Like, just be a good guy. And I think if you can do that, and by the way, keep enforcing the standards, things will work. So I found when I got to the Ranger Battalion, a lot of super alpha guys, far more than the regular Army, and constantly had to I've told people all the time, they are constantly nipping at your peers, are nipping at your heels, constantly, to see, as a new guy, whether or not you're going to make it, and you got to have the chops to do it. And it's really lonely, and it's really all this stuff, but you commit to, you being me, commit to doing it. And I realized, like, what, I'm going to show them, and more importantly, I'm going to show myself that I can do this thing, and I can only do that by being authentic. You got to be authentic. You can fake some things, but this is my kind of, my story is, be authentic. And that was kind of everything we've said, Mark. Be fair, be a good guy. Try and get to know these men, know what makes them tick. Learn, if nothing else, just the basics about them. Who, what, when, where, why. Learn about their spouses, learn about their kids, learn a little bit as you can as you're going. Like, who's the guy that you just got to frown at to get his acting gear? Who's the guy you might have to yell at a little bit? Who's the guy you smile at and he knows that he made, all the personalities. Sure. Yeah. So fast forward to Mogadishu, and in the bind we were in on that day, and we can talk about the battle specifics in a minute, but this story, a lot of things went wrong right off the bat. And for my guys and me, we were in the wrong spot. We got inserted in the wrong place, had a litter urgent casualty. The radio didn't work. We're in a big firefight. And all this happens immediately, like 20 seconds into the battle. And as the leader, I remember starting to feel that wave of panic coming in, because there are 4 really big problems that I need to solve because I'm in charge. And they're all really big ones. And oh, by the way, when we're in the middle of a big gunfight, and I certainly fear is part of it, without a doubt. But I remember this, and I've recounted this story a lot. I remember watching the men, my young Rangers, doing their job, and I realized, like, man, we're going to be all right. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Buying time for me to make a decision. So Matt make a decision. All of a sudden you realize, like, okay, prioritize and do it. But the whole lead up to this, to answer your question though, is I realized during that battle, literally, it's one of the weirdest things just to have this thought. I'm like, wow, so that's why we did, that training in Thailand. And that's why we did this. And I realized these young men were on autopilot, because they're scared too. Anybody that says they aren't scared when people are shooting at you is a, you know, absolute pathological liar. So they're scared too, and everything. They can only do what they're trained to do, and they're doing it instinctively. It's totally natural. And you know what? They're doing it in the crucible. So there's something to be said about, again, training these people to these high standards, because the high standards are going to determine the outcome
Yes.
throughout the chaos. And I realized, like, as much as I like to think this was all the Matt Eversmann, leader throwing lightning bolts and directing all this stuff, this was starting with individuals trained to really high standards, teams trained to really high standards, all understanding the mission, and all I got to do is be a problem solver.
Right.
My contribution to this fight is to be the problem solver and sort of help give them a nudge in the right direction. Because once this fight's on, it's on, and you can't order people, outside of the movies to run in front of, the machine gun nest. That men and women are gonna fight the way they know how to fight, the way they've been trained. So that's a long answer to your question of, institutions have a part of that. Of course, leaders build the institutions, but this idea of the person that's running the show, in this case, in this part of the battlefield, listen, he is only human too, and he can't be the center of gravity for everything that happens, because he just can't. He'll be overwhelmed. So you got to rely. The center of gravity might move around the team dynamic, all through the fight. At any moment, it could be that radio guy that's the center of gravity. Could be the medic. It could be the machine gunner. Like, when all we need, whatever it is, it has nothing to do with who's got the higher rank, but whose skill is needed most. I know we're wandering a little bit, but to your question, I think that there's what I learned from that experience, to spill it all the way back out here, is you train people to the highest standard you possibly can. That will certainly put you in really good shape in the crisis. Doesn't mean you're going to absolutely be successful, because enemies always got to vote. But if you can do that, you stand a pretty good chance of making it through. And I think when you look at Mogadishu in general, there's no way that any single U.S. soldier should have made it out of that city. No way. 10,000 armed Somali. That's what the CIA estimate was. 10,000 armed Somali, 150 Americans. Not nearly enough UN forces to do anything. Like, they should have killed every single one of us, and they couldn't.
I mean, I was just watching Black Hawk Down yesterday just to prepare for this and get inferences, and it's scary to hear that you guys went inside of what they call the hornet's nest, and it was just like everything went wrong. And during your answer, and I've shared it to you before, I love how much you are about leadership of the organism rather than organizational leadership. I do appreciate that, because you're very hands-on, you're real, you're genuine, and as you said, authentic. Just this week, I heard an idea: relatable beats impressive, right? Like, I'm not better than you. Like, things didn't go well just because Matt was there, or else they would have not gone well. I love that. Relationships are where we go to relate. And if you're very relatable and authentic, there's a beautiful thing about that. A woman bringing it to sport and then kicking it right back to Mogadishu. There's a woman who teaches cheerleading, coaches cheerleading. Monica Aldama is her name, and she actually was at a Netflix special called Cheer. And you could think Cheer is like no thing, but she runs Navarro Junior College, and they're like 13 years in a row national champions. And one of the things that she said is, we don't do things until we get it right. We do it till we can't get it wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really thought about when you talked about autopilot and being in the crucible and following to your instinct. I thought that was amazing. And then you gave this visual that you were nudging them. I love that, nudging them. You weren't like whipping them or pushing them or cursing at them. You're nudging them, you're guiding them, you're allowing them to be freely, authentically themselves, and then giving them guidance and empowerment to do pretty amazing things. So diving right back into Somalia inside of that day, just for one more question, can you talk about one or two really adverse circumstances where you guys were in a pinch point that would bring the listener inside to that day because nobody has the experience that you have?
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, what jumps out to me is not to be so over the top, but most of us don't deal with death on a daily basis in our lives unless we're a nurse, firemen, cops, whatever. So we had forgotten, and back into this answer, we had forgotten, even myself, the nature of war. And I like the reality of war is what I've coined it, is that good men and women, well trained, well led, well disciplined, held to high standards with the best equipment, can still die at the hands of an inferior enemy. Like there's the randomness of sometimes, or just the brute, blunt instruments of war. But good men will die on the battlefield. Good men and women will die on the battlefield. And that is something I can honestly say, even though in our minds you think about it, you do your will and you write your last letter home. I hadn't really contemplated what that would be like, that somebody that I'd been living with, training with, for a couple of years might die on my lap. Like that is something just unbelievable. Like, and I know that if you're listening to this, you're like, Matt, you're an idiot. Of course that happens on the battlefield. I'm like, yeah, no, you are right on both accounts. But you're like, man, we're doing such a good job. We got a good team. Like this isn't going to happen to us. And to deal with that during the battle, like this person, just suffered a mortal wound, a really bad wound. But oh, by the way, we're still got to fight. You still got to do your job. You can't sit here and grieve. You can't sit here to even feel bad, Matt. You need to, do your job best you can. Patch him up, get him on a litter. This is not individual, like us taking care of our wounded, getting them on a vehicle, start moving out, going through to the next piece and the next ambush. All these things, what I realize is like, again, maybe it's back to that training standards, but you realize like, man, this is something I'm just going to pack up, an emotion I'm going to have to pack up inside, and I'll deal with that later because, oh, by the way, we got this job to do. And I think that really applies in life in general. Like, man, you can't stop and you just can't stop. You've got to be able to keep pushing through, this fight. And that happened not just to me, but I think if you talk to any veteran of any sustained conflict, like you realize like you gotta, it's not going to be safe until you get back to the United States. You're constantly, no matter how bad yesterday was, you got to be looking, till, a minute from now, an hour from now, a day like you've got to be able to keep performing. And that I think is a really broad answer to the question. Best I got though, that, that was a series of, moments like that throughout the battle that you're like, man, this isn't just being a good marksman or being able to throw a hand grenade or come up with a strategy to get through this ambush. This is an emotion that each of us has to deal with. Because, oh, by the way, what else are you going to do? Yeah. There's that guy's still down there with the machine gun shooting at you. Yeah. And the fact that your friend just, is dead, it doesn't matter to him. He wants to kill you too. So you got to keep going. Again, I'm sorry to go so dramatic on our podcast today, but no. That when you say crucible, I don't know if most of us quite appreciate that until you talk about, the examination of examinations, and that's death, mortality for a young 20-something. We're not supposed to. Doesn't happen to 20-year-olds.
Well, I appreciate you bringing us there because everybody is going to experience death in so many ways, not at the extremity and the severity and the magnitude that you did and the intensity in that moment. I just think when it's a huge philosophical idea to contemplate death. It's huge in the Stoic philosophy where if you want to live more presently, you have to contemplate death. If you want to be good, you have to understand evil. if you want to be kind, you have to look what hate looks like. And I think that understanding the paradox allows you to live more fully in the light if you understand the darkness. That's really what comes to mind as you were talking like that. Now, going through one of the topics that you and I really wanted to get to, and I know you'll be able to not just have the research behind this, but experientially, firsthand experience that you went through it on identity. Identity means repeated beingness and to make the same as. And you went over 20 years in the military, repeated beingness of understanding leadership, uh, you know, all the things that come with being a soldier and a leader of soldiers. And then you make your way out into the world. And I just want to say this, that I was listening to you on a different podcast talk about family values. I heard you talk about one of your last tours in the early 2000s was the first time you had Tori and Molly in your life, and you didn't have that early on in your military career. So wherever you want to take us, because there's listeners out there that are always and constantly transitioning. I don't believe in retirement. You're always
Yeah.
kind of like finding that next level. Can you go into that?
Yeah. So there's some great, and I shouldn't be such a Dumbo and say like, there's some great things to talk about in that, Mark, but there are several lenses to look through to that comment. So let me just start with the first one about identity. And a transition for me, transitioning from active duty to this new world, 20 years and a couple of months, you realize like, hey man, I'm getting out, got to have a new chapter, new adventure. And I thought you just went home, to wherever your next, place to live, whether it's your wife's hometown or your hometown, doesn't matter. And you get another job and you have another 20-year career. And that's that. Like, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Like, that's really what I thought. But what I really didn't realize was that I was still stuck in, the first sergeant airborne ranger mode. That had defined me as an adult. And not, I don't want to be such a weasel and say like the Black Hawk Down guy, one of the Black Hawk Down guys, but that certainly does follow me around without a doubt. And I'm very proud about my experience with the Task Force Ranger. But the idea bigger though is like, man, that silly as it sounds, what I did for 20 years as a professional soldier was this identity of, I think, Matt the Airborne Ranger.
Sure.
And again, if you're listening or watching this, I please take that in the spirit it's intended, because when my wife shared with me then, she's like, dude, you need a new identity. To which I'm like, okay, time out. This is Dr. Phil Oprah stuff that I'm not following. I can't pretend to be something else. How dare you, and sort of self-righteous indignation about how dare you, Tori, tell me. But, like you things in life, you realize like she's wise and she's smart. And this idea, like they're not hiring the Airborne Ranger. They're hiring Matt, the man, to do whatever it is we're doing next. And I know this sounds silly, but I started thinking, and the more I started thinking, like, okay, what do I want to be seen as? What's the person? What's this identity? What's like that kind of thought? And what I realized was, what I want to be thought of? I wanted people to say like, he is a really good man, truly, in every sense, a good husband, a good father, a good son, a good brother, a good friend. Like those kind of are the five or six big ones that's most important. That's the true self. If you look at Matt Eversmann, hopefully I'll I'll get good grades on all of those metrics.
What's the reason you care about that?
Because that's the core. That's you. That's the essential. The banker, lawyer, Indian chief, fireman. That all changes. That could change with the wind. But one constant is the kind of person that you are, and you being, if I were standing on the street corner, I could still say, man, he's a good husband. He's a good dad. He's a good this, like, so this focus on my identity was, that's what I need to perfect, or at least I should be trying to perfect that. Because listen, as I told you, I had three different, W-2 jobs in, the first 10 years, and they all ended. Not because they were bad people, but they all ended, and not all by my choice. And I realized after that, man, I gotta try something else. And my wife said, well, listen, why don't we try doing something ourselves? story for another day. However, what that did was that took us down, a lot of different paths to, sustain ourselves, to build our family, to build our future and all that. But none of them had anything to do with a new identity. I'm still the same guy that hopefully was, a good son, a good husband, a good father. So that identity, if I were throwing it out to the masses right now, I'm like, it's a good exercise for us all to think about, what defines you the most, because rich or poor, black or white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, like all those identifiers really, um, they're just, they don't matter as much as the quality of the person and our thought of being a better man and a better woman every day. Um, that's important. That's really important. That's going to be the most important thing that we can focus on instead of, man, how can I make more dough? And again, of course we all want to make more dough. I'm not being don't want to be so weaselly about it, but what is more important, because to come back real quick, you know, we all are going to die. We are that memento mori. That we're all going there, and you can't wish it away. You can't fake it. Like, this is one that's going to get you, and if you can't smile about it, I got to tell you, you got bigger fish to fry than your identity, because it's going to come, and hopefully not for a long time. But that idea, though, man, we ought to be focusing on far more on, being the best people that we can be as our identifiers than pretty much anything else.
Yeah. I learned really recently in my life that the word character means engraved marks. So who you are all the time, outside of what clothing that you wear or tattoos that you have or something like that, something like even deeper than that, like engraved it within you. It's not just your preference or your tendency or an indication. It's something that is very solid in who you are all the time. And the reason why I wanted to know, what's the reason you care about being a good husband, a good father, a good friend. And to you, it's very common sense, but it's not common sense to everybody. So you kind of have learned things along the way. You've been humbled by life in a lot of ways. You've lost friends, different
Yeah.
things like this, that allowed you to be like, okay, I can't do this alone. One of the words that comes to mind is courage. And I talk about courage is what's necessary until you become confident at something. Confidence comes from doing what you're great at, like tying your shoes or a job that been doing for 2 decades. Aristotle said, courage is the highest human virtue. All other virtues follow it. You have to have the courage to be patient, the courage to be kind, and the courage to try again. You're talking about having 3 civilian jobs that went under, and you're trying again and trying again. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about as you're now going through this life after the military is, what is the piece of advice that you wish you were given when you were leaving the military? Like somebody, because you said you thought that it was just going to be a next chapter and you would kind of, I don't know if it was easy breezy into the next thing, but what do you wish that someone told you right then and there that would have prepared you or made you more well equipped for life after the military?
Yeah, no, it's a great one, and I don't know if I could qualify, break it down to just one piece of advice. But if I were gonna just answer you with the gut answer was, probably be, open up your blinders. Literally, don't just say you are, but really open up that rear sight aperture so that you can see as panoramic a view of life out here as you possibly can. And I didn't realize how myopic how small my lens was, till down the road, because luck and opportunity are around every corner, and people think that that's pithy. Luck and opportunity, like, you can't have luck. I'm like, luck happens all the time, and whatever people's definition of luck, I don't know. I'm not smart enough. I'm not the stoic, but I do know this, that I am living proof that where I am today is as far removed from where I was could have been. And I'm not saying just by natural, you know, progression and our maturity and all that, but I'm like, if you just said, hey, Matt, do you ever think you're going to write a book someday? I'd be like, no, you're silly. I'm not a writer. I'm a college dropout. Matt, do you ever think you would be, interviewing people for somebody else to write a book? I'm like, no, I'm not an interviewer. I couldn't do that. Like, there's no possible way. Matt, do you ever think that you could um, be a documentarian? Do you ever think that you could be the face, clearly face for radio, but like somebody might put you, in front of a TV camera and say like interview these people, for a documentary? I'm like, you're out of your mind. Like, absolutely, all these things. And go, will you ever think you'd speak in front of an audience of 10,000 people? Like, no, there's no, like, all these things that I would naturally say no to. I'm like, no, that's actually not true. If you open up your site aperture, there are opportunities that none of us could ever predict because we're not looking. And that would be I could go into details about a million things that bore you to tears, but I would have talked myself out of all of those things, and yet they've all happened. And they've happened not just a little bit, they've happened a lot. And it's because I do believe God has a plan for all of us, that took me down. And then you got to jump through those doors, and you got to, it's not going to throw everything at you to just, it's years in the making for these things. But if you're open to it, the possibilities really are endless. And I think I saw it all as everything was transactional. Everything was very cause and effect. If A, then B, like that was it. That was sort of the military way. And I realized, man, it's not like that out here. You want to, again, I don't want to suck all the oxygen out of the room, but that would be it. I would be like, just be open to it, because you have no idea what's going to happen next. None of us do. And if you do that, then you also realize, back to this failure thing, like, hey man, it didn't work. That's all right. The worst thing that happens is it doesn't work, and so your pride, we feel bad because, oh my gosh, I got a bad, I left this job, and people are going to look at me like I'm some kind of like leper. It's like, first of all, most people could care less because they're just trying to keep their jobs. And second of all, there is no report card. There's only one report card that matters at the end, and nobody down here is giving it to us. So once you kind of suck that one down and have a chaser on it, like just be. And it's not easy, again, I'm not here to mark all. We have the luxury of sitting here laughing and joking, but we've all been down the school of hard knocks, and when it wasn't so much fun. But it comes back to your faith and what gets you through, and you realize, like, you'll always get what you need.
Where do you get your sense of humor from? I love it. You're just on a serious topic. You're saying something, and then you just say something like a really witty quip.
Well, my head's going to get really large. I don't know. My wife and daughter don't think I'm funny, so you know.
Okay. So as you were talking there, one of the fascinating, but I also think saddest research out there is on IQ curve. It's a bell curve, but 13% roughly of people can't read and follow directions because they have a very low IQ. United States military will not accept someone under an 83. And uh, there's a difference between intelligence, fluid intelligence, which would be problem solving with speed, and I've come to really prize attention. So different than intellect and intelligence is attention, and where you're placing your focus, what you're concentrating on for a very long time. And as you were talking about be open, I was thinking about how uh, the book Anatomy of a Breakthrough, how you can either exploit or explore. And exploit means do what you're doing. The strategy's working, keep doing it. And when you hit a rut, in order to get out of the rut, you have to zoom out and explore, just like the blinders that you were talking about. And I really started to prize attention a lot more in that way because I'm naturally very extroverted, quick to speak, even speak over, even when I was very uninvolved, like being able to sit back and listen a lot more. And one of the things that I learned from the book by Charles Duhigg, Super Communicators, he said people want to be listened to, led, or loved. And I think in a lot of ways we're talking about that today. We're talking about listening to people and being genuine. We're talking about leadership a lot. And I want to go into the love aspect of things because that's not something that a lot of men talk about. I talk about it in any locker room that I go and speak at and different things like that. I do like the idea that love means to make better. I like the idea that Thomas Aquinas said to will the good of the other as other. Like we've been talking about being a good person, a good father. And one of the things I heard is how much you love to talk about loyalty, being a good teammate, encouragement, and the power of hugging and hugging your kids and hugging the people that you're around. Could you go into that? This idea, where does love play a role in this entire conversation? Is it too woo woo? Is it too soft to talk about, or you find it's an important topic inside of being a father, being a good person, and being a good leader?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating question. And usually when people say that, they're like, yeah, that's a BS question. But I mean, really, it's a fascinating question because men don't talk about love like that. We love our wives, like, we love our moms and families, but we don't, because that somehow has a connotation of softness, being weak, role changes, whatever. But I think that it's actually, if we start at the top, there's two things we're called upon to do: love God and love our neighbors. Like case closed. Next question. What do you want to talk about? Like that really is it. There's no like, if you're a believer, there really is no there's not a yeah but, like that's it. Um, Having been said, I think that this idea, when we think about fraternity, in the sense of men together for fill in the blank reason, whether it's social, whether it's spiritual, whether it's the athletic, whether it's the whatever it is, but what brings us together as a group, um, it's more than just the physical action. Here at my lacrosse deck, it's more than the physical action. There's got to be something intrinsic to our desire to be together. And I remember, and if you're a Greek scholar, forgive me, I can't remember which one it is, whether it's agape or arete. One of the two is brotherly love. One of them is, your spousal love. And whichever one I say was going to be the wrong one. So I'm just going to say it was one of those that I had a guy I met in college who was a larger than life figure. And he, well dressed, well turned out guy, president of the college. And he had been a Marine, and he had the one that's the brotherly love, in Greek, tattooed on his forearm. This
Is
is
it?
the day before. This is well before the days that everybody and their brother at Starbucks had tattoos. But this guy, and he was had been a ranger in Vietnam, and I didn't know, my Greek by any means, but somebody's like, yeah, man, he had the globe and laurel, and it said Arate, I think. And I'm like, wow, what an odd thing, that this well-heeled, turned out brilliant scholar, Rhodes Scholar has this tattoo, on his forearm. And I always thought about it like, wow, that guy's pretty cool. And then I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Not only that it's not, Popeye, this is something that actually means something. And that long-winded answer to the question comes back to, no, we should be proud of our ability to show our affection for our teammates, for our fellow man, for the guys that we ostensibly care about. And we ought to do it unabashedly. And again, I don't want to turn this like, hey, let's all be, fruity, skipping down the hallway, throwing flowers to everybody because, life is so great and I hug everybody in the airport. Of course not. But I'm talking about like that inner circle people, the people that we immediately have a connection with. I think it's important, much like being kind. I think it's important. Quick TV timeout. We have a book coming out called Thank You Teachers, kindergarten through 12th grade teachers. Jim and I did it, and it's coming out in April. And one of the things I learned as I spent, a year interviewing teachers, beyond, reading, writing, and arithmetic, what struck me, how many stories I heard from teachers that would say, if I don't give this child a hug today, he or she won't get one until they come back to school because there's no one at home that will literally show them affection. Nobody will, they won't get a hug. And you think for a child of whatever age, doesn't get that feeling of somebody literally touching them saying, you matter to me. And that, listen, you just start walking around anywhere. Like, my point being is that I think that you never know that somebody maybe never got a hug today or in a week. And I think it also, and again, not to, this is the hugging convention, but this idea of expressing your feeling for people is very important. I think men more than anything need it now. I think men have been beaten down to the point almost of submission, in a sense of like they don't even know how to behave. As men, like I can never do that because there's something not right about that. My phone won't tell me to chat GPT, won't tell me to do that. I don't know, but I think that we need to demonstrate that it is all right to say I love you. I think it's important, particularly to your friends and family. That needs to be verbalized. I'm sorry if I took us down the wrong path.
No, I don't even think the TV timeout was necessary because I do think that was completely tied to what we were talking about with the listen to, led, or loved. I've always said it to myself, they want to be helped, hugged, or heard. And then you bring in the hugging aspect. I mean, a child literally dies if you don't hug it and get skin to skin contact for several months, or at least it grows up not how it should. And congratulations on the book. What number book is this?
This is going to be number 6. Comes out.
Congratulations. It's absolutely wonderful. And in terms of the idea of hugged, I had a thought that I wanted to bring up about it. When I met you for the very first time, one of the questions that I asked you was, what do you know now that I wish you knew then when you were my age, and sort of thing. And I was just, awestruck by your story and who you were and who you are, just like your energy and charisma. And I still remember what you said to me. I said, hey, do you have like 1, 2, or 3 laws for me? And you said, more men need to be on time and punctual, attention to detail, and standards. Those are the things. And I think that's what we talked about at the top of the hour. But do you still believe those to be true? And is that something that's still really important to you?
Yeah, no, I think they all are good. I mean, they just happen to be 3 that are big to me. But this idea of probably, if we were going to if we were going to distill it to one, it would be something about high standards, like whatever that line would be about, striving for the standards and how we want to do our best to take care of all the people in all bits of our life. And one of them would be like be respectful of their time, so show up on time. It would be the all kind of all of it. I guess would always roll back into this idea of standards and just holding yourself to the highest ones possible. I mean, trying to live up to high standards in everything that we do, because we don't, because it's hard. It's really hard. You know what I mean? It just is, and it's a lot easier not to have high standards. And I think now that's something you can put that template over anything that we experience in life every day, and we could say like, could I have done better? Could I have done better at fill in the blank? And the chances are pretty much, yeah, you could. You probably can't hustle enough. You probably can't be more motivated, or you probably can be more motivated. You probably can hustle more. You probably can, if you really think about it, like, yeah, you mailed it in. And I'm talking about me. This is all in all the self-reflection, truly like, hey, you know what? I could have been at the gym more in the last decade. Clearly, I'm working on it. I could have been, more present at fill in the blank, with my daughter's school. I could have, there's all these things like, man, I wish I had a do-over on that, but I can't. So I just got to keep trying to do better. I got to constantly try and do better. And I don't know that anyone's holding us accountable for that, Mark. I don't know, because we're all in this world, again, apolitical, but we're all in this world like, what's in it for me? Like, what's in it for me? And I'm like, dude, just how about just doing the right thing for once? How about that? Like, do the right thing. And, I had this thing, a lot of times, and a lot of people are going to say like, Matt, you are an idiot. And I probably am, but it's at the point now with some things, when somebody like, hey, we'd like you to come speak, to our group, on such and such date. Are you available? I'm like, yeah. settle on a price, and hey, I usually ask, pay travel and lodging, and and they're like, all right, cool. Like, you got a contract? I'm like, if you want a contract, write a contract. I just, I'm trusting you. Literally, this isn't some complicated deal. Like, just have a check, pay me, and we'll call it a day. How about that?
Right.
And people are shocked. They're like, oh, you ought to have a contract. What happens if it cancels? I'm like, are you going to cancel? Oh, no. I'm like, then we're fine. We're fine. And you know what? I'll take it on the chin. If at the end of the day you do cancel, then okay. It's
Right.
not my fault.
Right.
And again, I'm not trying to get into business practices here, but really to the point, like, there's this stuff like, it's all going to be fine. Just be a good guy.
One of the things that really popped in my mind, because that's probably like the second or third time you use the word accountability, and I think accountability is amazing. And account comes from like having a diary or a journal to like you have the ability to take account about your life. And each one of my individual clients has a mental performance journal where I expect us to have like a good dialogue back and forth, and we're taking notes and hunting and gathering information from each other, not just like me telling them what to do, but them also sharing about their life, and we have a way better discussion from that. But I think a lot more people can take account of their life, like, where am I at? What you do not measure cannot be managed. And once you start to measure something, the rate of your improvement will accelerate. And I just think there's something there from the accountability. And it also has the same ending in the word responsibility. You have the ability to respond. So whether you're taking accountability or responsibility, I think these are really important topics. In terms of any time I go speak to anybody, I really want to know what's on their heart and what repeated messages really matter to them. So I'm going to ask you that question. We've really wandered quite well today, into a lot of amazing things. Is there anything that you wish we talked about that what we haven't gotten to yet?
We have covered a lot. We cut a wide swath here, Mark. You're a tenacious interviewer, and put me on my heels. No, I listen. The thing is, I love all of it, and again, I don't want to be such a fruitcake about it, but I just think this idea of mental, physical, spiritual, you know, physical development is so important. I'm 59 years old, and you know, hopefully got some more time on the clock here. But this idea, got to keep trying to get better. Gotta keep trying to get better. We can't coast in anything we talk about. And listen, if we spent that the whole time talking about Mogadishu, that would be great. Except there are so many people with so many better stories than that. From a military perspective. Let me just throw this curveball right back at you.
Please.
And I had we did a book. It's one of the few books I was interviewing people concurrently. One was the teachers, and one was we started off. It was going to be the living Medal of Honor recipients. And long story, not so long, was one of the I had been reaching out to living Medal of Honor recipients. Said, "Hey man, we're doing this book and would love to interview you." One of the gentlemen, reached out and was not too pleased with me. And I'm like, I'm here to listen. What's up? And I think he thought that we were going to write a book about all of them, regardless of their input. And I mean, he really let me have it. Like, hey, he just really, like, you were so out of line. You had no business doing this, and blah 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 blah. And I'm just like really taken back. I mean, here's one of the bravest men in the world, yelling at you, and I'm like, oh golly. And finally, I'm like, hey, listen, I'm not writing your story, not telling your story, and he's like, well, fine. And what other people do, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, he hung up, and it really bothered me. And not bothered me like, I appreciate, it was one of those rare times I knew that I was right. We haven't done anything wrong. We only tell the stories of the people that signed consent to, tell their story and blah, blah, blah. But this guy who clearly didn't want to be interviewed, didn't want to tell a story, whatever it was, really, really, like, who was one that kept me up at night? Really was like really sad, really all this stuff. And, and then I found myself getting angry and all going through this emotion. And I'm like, man, I wish I had another crack at that argument. These are the things I should have said and I would have said, and blah blah blah. And then the very next day, or a couple of days later, I had an interview with a teacher who I didn't know, and I didn't know her story. And this woman teaches non-communicative autistic children. You think that, let that sit in for a second. And we talked for hour and a half, and she told me this story of working with this one non-communicative autistic child for 5 or 6 years. Every day. Every day. Read this story, but the whole point is, 5 years, 6 years, every day. She's this is her life. This is this teacher's life. And, you're like, wow, just the Mother Teresa, amongst us. And I remember thinking, first of all, shame on me for getting my feelings hurt by a guy who had a difference of opinion. Shame on me also for feeling bad, like, oh my gosh, this person, Medal of Honor recipient. This is not a knock on, but I'm like, we hold these people sometimes, and and I'm like, shame on me for that. This is the hero, like this woman, this selfless woman who didn't just do it once, one day. Her battlefield's been going on her entire career. For 6 years, she's been at battle, if we're using that metaphor. And this woman not asking for nothing. And I remember just sitting there in tears thinking about, just shame on me for being so fragile, and shame on me for all this stuff. Shame on this guy for our argument together, because this is just buffoonery compared to what this woman is doing. And so I guess the moral of this story of it all is, man, there are heroes amongst us, angels amongst us everywhere. And if you got your blinders open, you'll see it. And that's the stuff that's what's inspiring. Look for that every day. That's what should get you going, inspire us to be a better man, woman, son or daughter.
Couldn't agree more. And I'm not sure if it's apocryphal or true, but I think the root of the word hero means servant. And I think the best heroes in our life are constantly in that posture. They're obsessed with what they're giving, not what they're getting. And we are in 0% control of receiving love, even though it's the only thing that we want. We're in 100% control of giving love. And you will get eventually,
Yeah.
right? Because a wave doesn't crash where it starts, when it's give. As we land this plane, I'm just going to say, give you the plug so you don't have to. I hope that you're hired. I hope you're given a contract by somebody that's listening to this one, so that they go out and read all 5 or 6 of your books. When's that next one coming out?
Easter Monday, April 8th.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Right around the corner here. And people that want to hear more, hire or learn more for you, where should they go to learn more about Matt Eversmann?
Well, I feel like a weasel saying it, but I do have a website. There's a Matt Eversmann website, and come check it out. You can get in touch with me through that. And I'm not on social media, so I'm like the worst salesman in the history of bad salesmen. But yeah, you can find me online.
I think there's something humility about that, and that you're the furthest thing from a weasel. I'll just say it very publicly that we've probably only had 3 or 4 interactions now, but I consider you a friend, and I admire you. I think men do want to be admired, and women do want to be adored, and I admire you. Not just because of the story, your story in the past. That's what's wonderful, but also who you're looking to become. I really admire that, and I've said it to you off air, but I also want to say it on air. I hope that many people will listen to this and be like, wow, he's extremely genuine. He doesn't take himself too seriously, but he also takes the roles in his life very seriously. And I think there's something about that. If you can take the roles in your life and the responsibilities in your life more seriously than you take yourself, that's going to hold water.
Well, thank you. And I just, just one more, not to, usurp it, but to throw in, and all of you said, everything you said is so kind, and, it's like music to my ears. But I would throw out to anybody that's listening, also, this stuff's hard. It's really hard. And again, if we're looking on the scale of, success versus failure, we're going to have a lot more in the loss column than we would in the win. The wins will be big, but it's hard. And that's why it's so important. Back to the love thing, back to this, when you meet people that you connect with, embrace that. And whether they're blue hair or not, it doesn't matter. But if you have a connection with somebody, like, enjoy that, get strength from that. That's what's going to get you through these tough times. And there's no reason why we should, just because it wasn't a former Ranger teammate out here, it's you find new teammates, and just doing what it is. Everything we talked about today, it's really hard. It's not there's nothing easy about it. It's hard, and you need to be around people that are going to prop you up and keep you, not yes men, not sycophants, but people that are like, hey man, you can do this, you can get through it, and I'm always here for you. So God love you for letting me come and wax so philosophically, and sound smarter than I am.
It was a joy. Thanks, Matt.
Well, love you, man. Thank you.
Love you as well. What were your expectations coming on, and what was it like for you to be on Grateful and Full of Greatness?
Yeah, well, I wasn't quite sure what we were getting into today, other than something about daring to be great, being better. And Mark, you were fantastic in letting me have a dialogue and a nice, easy conversation. I love the direction it went, and I love that we covered a lot of maybe more intimate topics that men don't generally talk about, but they're important, and we should be talking about them even more, because it's the basis of us getting better and swinging for the fences for higher standards. So thank you for having me. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to listen to whoever your next guest is, who will be far more handsome or prettier than I. But thank you for having me.